Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Current Issues and Analysis Show. I'm your host and presenter, Michael Young. Thank you very much for joining us and for letting us into your communities and into your homes. This evening, we're going to be having a discussion with Captain Gerry Gouveia. He's the Chief Executive Officer for Roraima Airways, and he's going to be speaking to us about the recent plane crash, and we're also going to be discussing matters of importance in the aviation industry. Welcome, Mr. Gouveia, to the Current Issues and Analysis Show. I know you're no stranger, obviously, to television land and to matters of aviation. We trust that over the next 20 minutes, viewers, we're going to get to speak to Mr. Gouveia intensely and in-depthly about all of the developments taking place and some of the challenges facing the sector. My first question to you, Mr. Gouveia, I know you have extensive experience in this area. I want you to probably give me an analysis of where we are today with respect to aviation, and then we're going to fast forward things a little bit and speak, I think, quite in-depthly about the recent plane crash. But in your own words, where are we as a country with respect to aviation?
Well, let me tell you that aviation continues to be the safest form and safest mode of transportation in the world. And Guyana is no exception to that. In fact, the Guyana aviation sector have gone through a tremendous reform over the last 10 years, led by an IDB program that dealt with an aviation sector reform program. And that had, through that program, there have been tremendous reform in terms of the laws, in terms of the oversight, in terms of the capacity of the Civil Aviation Department, which is now the GCA. And that actually saw a tremendous raise in standards throughout the industry and compliance that made Guyana compliant and equal to any region in the Caribbean and the world, so that all of the air operators, all the pilots there, our pilots remain highly trained. They're retrained and rechecked, and our engineers are also highly trained and skillful as anywhere in the Caribbean or the world. So, and our planes, the maintenance of our planes are done to international standards. Unfortunately, every time you have an incident, yes, and a crash happens like this, and we all grapple with these things every day. The space shuttle in the United States had a fatal accident twice. And what we do in these instances, we learn from these events, and it's very important that we then plug the areas that might have been deficient. But I will say to you that aviation here in Guyana, the professionals involved in aviation, the Civil Aviation Department, the private aircraft operators, the pilots, the engineers, are as highly trained as anywhere in the world. Our maintenance systems, let me give you an example. Pilots, for example, are trained. Every 6 months, pilots have to do a medical. They have to go through a recheck, so they go back in a plane with a check captain who will then take them through all the paces. So every 6 months, when that is happening, the check pilot is not only checking the coordination of the pilot, but he's also looking at his attitude. He's checking his knowledge, checking his response time to emergencies, and so on.
Yes.
And that happens every 6 months. So I have been a pilot now for close to 38 years, and that has been my life. So every 6 months I do this pilot medicals, every 6 months I go through these checks and so on. And then every route that you fly, you have to fly once a year with a qualified pilot beside you, regardless of what your experience levels are.
Wow.
In terms of the maintenance of planes, every part that go on a plane, every propeller and every engine could only be on that plane for a life, for so many hours, say it's 2,000 hours.
Yes.
And every part of that plane is recorded and detailed, monitored every day. So before a plane flies every day, it is inspected before the first flight of the day. The pilots inspect the plane before and after, and at the end of the day, the engineers again would inspect those planes, and those planes are also inspected in a detailed manner. And some aircraft, there's a maintenance schedule, so for every hour, every 50 hours a plane flies, it will go down for maintenance, and there are particular things they do. Okay. And then every 100 hours it comes down. And this is regimented. These planes will be grounded and go through this regimentation. And then at the end of every year, an annual inspection is done, which basically takes the aircraft apart and puts it back together with all of the components of the aircraft. So people have to, there's no need to believe that our industry is unsafe in any way. The aviation industry, the operators, the pilots, the engineers, the Civil Aviation Department, everybody works to a very, very high standard.
Okay.
The challenge that we do have a little bit, obviously, is the issue of our runways in the hinterland. You know, they're not all paved runways, they're not huge runways. So it calls for a lot of skill in the pilots we have sometimes landing in those runways. And because our country is covered by rainforests and that our navigation aids are limited, so we navigate by the satellites and so on. So those are some of the challenges. But in terms of the pilots and the planes and the operators, I would say that we have a very, very safe aviation industry in Guyana.
And then, considering what you've said, what has to be done to improve those areas that are found to be lacking? And I guess the challenges that you pointed to are significant when one talks about aviation aid and all of those other things, the state of the runways. What would be your recommendation, Captain, for dealing with those issues so that just in the same manner in which you describe the professionalism and the high standards of the operators and those in the industry, you'd be able to talk about those other areas which are lacking?
No, absolutely, absolutely. I will say to you, like for example, in 2012, when the monies for maintenance of runways were cut from our national budget, that sent shockwaves in the industry because the maintenance of those runways are vitally important. We need every year the government to be able to be spending money resurfacing those runways, improving the conditionalities and so on, improving the navigation aids in the country and the international airport. And when our parliament had cut that budget and cut out those things, that was a serious blow to us. And we would urge there are some things to do with public safety, that people move away petty politics from and deal with those things in the national interest. So that is the one area, of course. But you know, the issue of learning from these incidents and accidents when they happen, our accident investigation, we must, in a very determined and very professional way, investigate these accidents and incidents and find the reasons why, and then we surgically will plug those holes.
Yes.
For example, I was not very comforted by Minister Robeson-Benz saying he's going to increase surveillance of the industry, because that is throwing mud. I think even though that may be one part of the strategy, I think what more particularly is needed is for us to find out exactly what caused this accident, exactly what caused that incident.
And we don't have the ability to do so at this time, professionally, as
well, we do, but unfortunately, I don't believe that we are doing it right. I don't believe that we are doing it as correctly as it should be done. And so when we finish these aircraft accident investigations, that the public and the professionals in the industry must know the findings of every one of these accidents so that we could correct surgically what that problem was.
Yes.
There have been so much improvement in the aviation industry over the last 100 years. I mean, there's been fantastic improvement in safety. And all of the safety measures came about because we learned from the mistakes that were made. And when we have any accident that happened, and when last have you seen an aircraft accident, incident, or act or crash published in the media? They need to be published when the investigation is finished. They are not secret documents.
Okay.
And they need to be released to the media, and so the public could read it, and so the aviation industry could also learn from it. So I think that is vitally important for us. The other area that we find that is of concern to us is when, in fact, you do have, and unfortunately, if you do have an aircraft accident, the response to the search and rescue system and the ability not only to put human beings there, but the equipment, helicopters, and the equipment that we need in a rapid response way to save lives. Because even if we may find the aircraft, which is a challenge by itself, but if you find the aircraft, then you must be able to get there to rescue people.
Yes.
And if, as a country, we don't have, at the very crucial time, we need this helicopter with the power that will go into those mountains and go into the jungle and sling men into the jungle to save people's lives. If we as a country are lacking that resource at the critical moment, then I believe we have a lot to answer.
Were we lacking that resource?
Yes, absolutely. When this last crash happened.
We're talking about the one that happened on January 18th.
Yes, the one that happened last week.
Involving Trans-Guyana.
That's right. Unfortunately, when we did find that aircraft, we saw it. We were right over it, but we couldn't get it because the helicopters we were using are the very small single-engine helicopters. And those helicopters don't have the power to really stay in one place in the environment like that. And especially if you're attempting to sling men down and rappel men in on a rope onto the aircraft so you could rescue and check the conditions of survivors, those aircraft don't have the power. So because if you had a high wind and there were men on the rope and the pilot got it correct for the wind, he could actually kill the men on the rope or kill himself.
Wow.
So that is why we need the Bell 412, which was parked at the airport, which apparently had a maintenance problem and still do have a maintenance problem. So as a nation, that is like having a fire engine not working. And you say, listen, we have a fire engine, but you know what? It's parked, it's not working. We should never have an occasion where that aircraft is not working. As a nation, and because of the wide expanse of our jungles and where our planes operate to aid in national development. And every day we have thousands and thousands of people and thousands of pounds of cargo being moved into the hinterland every day. There's 130 flights every day being moved out to Ogle. Not to have a search and rescue system that is deficient in any shape or form is a national disgrace.
But do you think then, Captain, that there's also need to boost the awareness of all of the operators themselves, that they too need to respond and follow all of the guidelines? Because one of the questions that was being asked about Trans-Guyana's about the plane or the aircraft is whether it was in tip-top condition.
Listen, I will just stop there and say to you that Trans-Guyana, all the operators in Guyana,
yes,
all their airplanes are in tip-top condition. Their maintenance systems, their pilots are in tip-top condition.
Okay. So that was not one of the
No, absolutely, absolutely. But like I said to you, you know, you could have the best systems in place.
Yes.
These things are man-made. And unfortunately, from time to time, the space shuttle had a problem,
yes,
you know? And so this was not a Trans-Guyana fault. And I'm even preempting the investigation by
yes,
saying that. That is my opinion. And the investigation will obviously come to what is it, in fact, caused that accident. And I don't want to preempt that, but I will certainly say that I would not in any shape or form say this was an issue of a Trans-Guyana fault, in my view.
Okay.
Trans-Guyana operates at very, very high standards. Trans-Guyana is my competitor, and we compete every day. But I will say that they are a fierce competitor, but they operate highly professional, and so
yes,
does their services, and so does the other operators. So this is not a case of those things happening. It's a case of when, unfortunately, if we do have an incident, that as a nation, we must have a system to respond to save lives, because when we first got word that this aircraft went down and the pilot reported he was going down, we should be able to, in a very, very short period of time, get into the area of that crash site and be able to rescue people.
Was the time an issue this time around in terms of mounting the action?
No. I must tell you, Minister Robeson Ben personally got involved. I was very pleased. He was at the airport. The Director of Civil Aviation, Director General was there, Mr. Zulfikar. They did what they had to do. They assembled, they set up their operations center. The planes were in the area. It was very difficult to find because it's really a needle in a haystack. And
yes,
but I will say to you, in less than 24 hours, the plane was found.
yes.
But when it was found, then is when the handicap started.
Well,
we were seeing it and we couldn't get it. And if those boys were injured down there, the helicopter that should have been there to help us to sling men down in there was parked to the airport.
Well, you know, Minister has a different view.
I don't know what the Minister position is.
To the Bell. Well, let me ask this. When you arrived there, Captain, did you get to see the bodies of the men, or were you at all?
I actually was involved. You see, in these things, there's what you call the search,
yes,
and then there's the rescue or the recovery.
Yes.
When I was involved in the search, and when we were successful in locating the aircraft, then I withdraw from the area, because at that point in time, then, and in fact, when we withdraw is when we had indications that there was no one. The possibilities of persons being alive is very, very rare. And then, of course, the recovery. That is when the investigators. So the Army were told when they were going in there, and when the men were inserted in the jungle, and our special forces were just amazing. They were brave, they were strong, they got in there, we inserted them in the jungle that afternoon, and those men walked through the night. And I was flying over that jungle, and I could see there's swamps down below there, and they're thick jungle. And those Army Special Forces men walked through that jungle in haste, navigating themselves to this one little position in this jungle because they believed they were going to save lives. They think that men were, because we didn't know. And our Army Special Forces need a great, big thank you from a grateful nation. They made me very, very proud. They should make all of us very proud. And so at that point in time, the Army were told when they get there to secure the integrity of the crash site, because we need the crash site to remain as sterile as possible, so that when the investigators get there, we could actually be able to, every tree that was broken, the path into the trees, it tells you the story, so the investigators could build the case and finding the right reason, because we all need to know what caused it so we can learn from it. And so the Army were told to secure that site, and so the rest of us withdraw. That is why I was not there.
Let's come back to the wider picture. You had said earlier when you started that, you know, we operate at a professional standard and all of these different things. But the reports in the media as of recent, we found that wheels are falling off of aircrafts when they're taking off.
I want you to stop right there. That, first of all, that was not a Guyanese aircraft.
Okay.
Not as excuses, because we talk about the aviation industry.
Yes.
But that was not a Guyanese aircraft. I understand.
I just want to draw the conclusion.
Hear what you talk about. You have to talk about the fact that one of the doors opened in flight. One of the
I was going to get there to that and the other
and incidents. You talk about the aircraft that had the incident at Ogle. Listen, and the way to judge aviation safety is this. There's incidents, there's occurrences, there's incidents, and there are accidents, and then there are fatalities.
Yes.
And if you look at Guyana over the last 40 years, and you look at the number of flights being done every day, you look at the number of passengers being moved every day, and you correlate that with the incidents, that is, an aircraft maybe have a blowout and run off the runway.
Yes.
Or you have a door open. That's an incident. That's not an accident. A crash is what happened in last week. The one that happened at Ogle is an aircraft crash as well. That aircraft took off. The pilot and the investigations will tell us what happened, and he went off the runway, and so on. And what we need to do is to say, with all the number of flights we are doing, with all the number of passengers we are moving, how many deaths have we had? How many incidents have we had? And if you look at those statistics, you will find that Guyana sits at the top of the world in terms of aviation safety, amongst the top countries in the world that pay very, very close attention to aviation safety. So if you look at the statistics, and people may say, look, all of us are entitled to our own opinion, all of us, but we are not entitled to our own facts. And so if you will say to me that Guyana aviation safety is a problem, tell me why. Don't tell me what you perceive and what you think. Tell me what the facts are. And the facts, when you put the facts down, the facts will tell you that Guyana aviation is still one of the safest aviation sectors in the world, and we could stand up there very proudly and say that.
What can we do then to improve the overall picture and to reduce the incidents? Because while there are not accidents within the industry and while there are not casualties and fatalities, incidents are just as important, one may want to argue. What can we do as a country and, within the sector to boost that?
Let's learn from it. Like, for example, this door that opened in flight. We need to find out, and an investigation because this here got to be, but why wasn't that door properly locked before the flight? So we need to find out whose responsibility it was to lock the door, whose responsibility to check that the door was locked. Did the door warning light in the aircraft malfunction? That's why the pilots didn't know it was locked. And then, more particularly, when you turn the lock to lock it, did the lock work? Did the lock work? And did the warning mechanism that is in the cockpit to tell the pilot that that door is not locked, did it work? And so what I'm saying to you in the investigations, that is what we need to find out. We need to find out why wasn't the pilot warned that the door was unlocked, why and whose responsibility it was to lock it, whose responsibility it was to check that it was locked, and did the mechanism work in locking it. Now, if we find that any one of those things, we need to plug it. We need to say, well, if it was the loaders or the dispatchers who were supposed to lock the door, who is it to check it? Who was there to double check it, and so on. So we need to find those things. The aircraft that had the problem at Ogle, we need to find out what happened. This is the long runway. Ogle runway now is 4,200 feet by 100 feet long. So the safety and the margins around that airport have been tremendously improved. Ogle is now one of the most fantastic young and small airports in the Caribbean, with all of the safety measures. Why would this aircraft take off? Did he use the entire runway? Did he use half of the runway? Did he have a blowout? I mean, we need to find out why.
Should there be a time frame when these investigations should be wrapped up? Because I think while it's all good to say that we're investigating, one could be investigating for years.
Forever. And you're very right. So we need to find out why. And we need to find out if an accident happened, was it the pilot? Did the pilot make a mistake? And if the pilot makes a mistake, and this mistake was covered in his training, then is the training lacking? Did we miss something in the training? And so that's why when I said we need surgical intervention is when we find out what caused these incidents, we need to go to it and plug it. Now, Minister Ben position that we need, he needs to increase surveillance. I don't have a problem with that. In fact, it is always better to keep improving and your inspections and audits and so on.
Yes.
But that is not going to solve the problem as much as finding out what caused the individual incidents and plug them. So the accident investigation is crucial. And that is why it's important that we, like today, I think somewhere in one of the news, they had the report that says we don't need Civil Aviation Department to be leading the investigations on these aircraft accidents, because Civil Aviation themselves could be a subject of the investigation. If you are the person who is doing the oversight, if Civil Aviation is the one who is making sure that these inspections are done, and then the accident investigation found that the oversight was not as vigilant as it should have been, then Civil Aviation might be responsible for it,
yes.
and so on. So we need to have an independent accident investigation in Guyana, and we need Civil Aviation to be part of it, but they should not be leading it, so that at the end of the investigation, the confidence in the results of the investigation, you know that it was impartially done and that we could definitely find what is the reason for this accident. The one that happened in Plaisance,
yes,
that crashed into the house. There are questions that we want to know. We want to know when that aircraft arrived, did the Civil Aviation do the right things?
Well, could I ask you
Yes.
this? Then is it a case where when the investigations are completed that the reports are not made public? Because I tend to be getting that the findings, while we know that the accident happened and an investigation has been launched into it, we're not so sure as to what the definitive findings.
That is the point I make. That is why I'm saying that I don't understand why those accident investigation reports are not made public. And in fact, we had an aircraft went down in the Massachusetts area with 12 passengers or 13 passengers on it. They survived, but it was a crash. And the accident investigation for that, we still don't know. And what is happening is those planes are still flying. When an accident like that happens, it could be the weather, so it could be the environment, it could be the machine or the man. And we need to fix whichever one it is. We don't know. But we know we had 13 people sitting on the floor of the jungle. This aircraft crashed. Why it crashed, what lessons could we learn? We in the industry don't know. And that to me is an indictment on the system. So there are areas that we could improve. And those areas, I believe, I would have no difficulty in the increased surveillance, if we want to call it that, and audits and so on. And issues of search and rescue, issues of accident investigation, and we must learn from these accidents, and we must go surgically and plug the areas where the deficiencies might have caused this accident. And it could be things that already in the regulations that we are oversighting every day, but it could be that somebody missed something.
Okay.
You know. Now the issue of testing pilots for drugs and alcohol and aviation people in general, maybe it is something that as a nation, Civil Aviation, as they move to this next stage, maybe it's something we need to do.
It is not done?
It is not done as a matter of routine, but it should become a matter of routine. For example, I don't believe that we have a drug usage problem in Guyana like they have in the United States. The United States is a market for drugs and so on. But still, I think we will have more to gain by knowing for sure that we have a drug and alcohol testing program for everybody in aviation. Already my staff that work at the international airport, all of them are tested for drugs and alcohol because, of course, this is the international airport and they're handling international flights. But I think generally across the aviation industry, I think Minister Robeson-Ben will be well advised to, in the new steps in improving the system, to introduce drug testing, drugs and alcohol testing.
Okay, well, Mr. Gouveia, we're almost out of time. Your final comments on the way forward, and in terms of dealing with, other incidents. You've already said, quite frankly, what the situation is and where we're lacking, what we can do. Your final comments.
I am very, very, very proud to be part of the aviation fraternity in Guyana. Our pilots are fantastic young men. They're brave, they're skillful, and every day they're out there. And for example, we still have a deficiency in having accurate weather reports from our hinterland areas, so we still depend on ordinary people telling us, well, the clouds are so high, and so on. And so those are areas that we need to improve. And our pilots they take those planes out there, they use all the skills, and they continue to aid in national development. And I want to say I'm a very proud member of that fraternity and the aviation sector generally.
Well, thank you very much, Captain Gouveia, for joining us on the current issues and analysis show. Of course, I'm going to extend an invitation to you. Maybe we'll be discussing other things that are more exciting and not, of such a great magnitude and of such importance. But I think there's going to be times later on when we'll discuss all of the things that have been corrected, and we'll look at new standards that are necessary within the industry. And thank you very much, viewers, for joining us on tonight's edition of our show. Do join us again next week for another show. I'm Michael Young. Goodbye.